Thank you very much. You know, usually when I get to stand up in front of people, I'm supposed to talk about poetry. It's nice to get to be here tonight with you to celebrate and talk about something else, the importance of the Center for Women here at Emory. I teared up at the end of that video we were watching, because, and Linnell said, "Oh, you're one of those." I tend to do that all the time. I wish I could stop doing it, but what I felt looking at it was that, and I said to Donna, that's exactly what it is. When Allie or Donna call, you just show up. You're here. And I'm here, and you're here, and I thank you for that. It really is an honor to get to celebrate with you tonight this 20th anniversary. But of all the important work done here at the center to support the lives of women, both in and outside of the academy and outside of the university, I find I'm drawn for deeply personal reasons to the work promoting awareness of domestic violence. So often these issues are cloaked in secrecy, rooted in shame, or more insidiously, denial. On a few occasions at other gala events, I've heard very well-meaning people say things like, "You have probably encountered a woman living in a domestic violence situation, perhaps a coworker or someone you passed on the street." They don't often say, "one of your neighbors," or "someone in this room." It's implicit in their words that those things don't happen to us, not to people like us, not to educated women or women who live in affluent neighborhoods and attend gala events to promote awareness. Part of the necessary work of the Center for Women at Emory is to dispel those myths, to remind us that domestic violence can happen to anyone, that this is a shared concern for all of us, and that there is much work to be done. I am a daughter of domestic violence. I grew up in a household in which the threat of violence constantly loomed. I've awakened at night to hear my mother's abuse at the hands of my former stepfather, the man who would later continue to stalk her long after her escape to a battered women's shelter and their divorce, and finally end her life with a last beating and a bullet to her face and neck. My mother was an educated woman, someone with all the resources at her disposal to escape a violent marriage, and yet even she could not get away. My mother had risen to number 2 in the Georgia Division of Mental Health and what was called mental retardation at the time, and later, at the last of her life, the director of mental health in DeKalb County. So she knew all the right people, could make all the right moves, and it always made me think, if a woman like her couldn't escape, how do we tell poor women, or uneducated women, or women who are more dependent, that they can get away too? And when you hear the statistics, and somebody might in this room be able to correct me on this, but it's much more likely, I think almost 70% more likely for a woman who escapes her violent partner to be murdered than those who stay. It's almost like deciding to free yourself and escape is indeed a death sentence. I'd like to tell you a bit of her story in her own words. So I'm going to read just a bit from a handwritten narrative found in her briefcase on the morning she was murdered, June 5th, 1985. You might not think such a voice is appropriate for a celebratory event, but I believe that to hear her in her own words is to celebrate the ongoing work of the people here at the center to make a difference in the lives of women. It is to reckon with the past and to celebrate the place to which we've come with all that we've learned and are still learning. I had heard about the Council for Battered Women a long time before I had any direct contact with them. I read everything I saw and silently applauded their work. I always felt that it was an agency I would like to volunteer my services to when the kids grew up. I always knew that I would get out of my marriage. It was one of these things that never should have happened. The reason it did was a combination of emotional blackmail and physical threats and intimidation. Since he always said he wasn't happy either, I assumed that we would back out gracefully when our son left for college. So on each of his birthdays, I counted off one more year. I got down to 8. The beginning of the end started in the fall of 1978 when I changed jobs. Not to imply that there had not been trouble during the 9 years before. I was thankful when it was only a hole punched into the wall or beaten into a cabinet with a hammer. My physical damage ranged from a black eye, hairline fractures of the jaw, to bruised kidneys and a sprained arm, all for things he thought about. I learned to gauge his moods and become a master at diffusing him. One of our problems was my successful career. The new job came about as a surprise to me. I discussed it thoroughly with him. The other major problem was my daughter. From a previous marriage, someone that he insisted I loved more than the son that we had together. While he was not overtly cruel to her, he managed to do little things to keep her upset. If I attempted to intervene, it only made matters worse. She spent most of her preteen years in her room. Now, I came up, this is about 13 pages that they found in her briefcase the morning that she died. And we had escaped that morning. Finally, I told my mother what my stepfather was actually doing to my life to make it difficult. And that's the moment that she said we had to go. She came to my room the night before, and she said, put everything you want in the front of your closet. Don't take the bus home from school. I'll be there to pick you up. And that's how we got away. She and my little brother went to a shelter for battered women. Of course, because of the kind of systematic patriarchal nature of society, it still became difficult for her to escape. My mother was at a shelter for battered women, but he could still follow her from work and find her there. When she got an apartment on her own with an unlisted number, he had a friend at the phone company who gave it to him. There were no ways for my mother to hide, and yet she did everything that she could to hide. It is perhaps in the wake of those things that I must have become a writer in some ways, believing in the power of a woman's voice, the power to be heard, to have the kind of agency that might change things. I've talked about before how I began writing in my journal knowing that he was reading it. My stepfather was reading it. And I began to address those entries to him. And so in that way, my first audience was the men out there who were committing these kinds of acts. Now, if I had known better, I might have known the danger that I was in by doing such a thing. I was young and naive. I was a child. My mother knew the danger. In this same journal entry that I'm talking about, she mentions a night that he played with a knife at the kitchen table and told her that he was going to kill her and that he was going to then kill the children and himself as well. So a lot of what she was doing was simply to protect us. Does that make someone become a writer or an advocate or all the things that we are in this room? It has been said that poetry makes nothing happen, that poetry can't save lives. I'm here to say that I think it can save a life. And I think all the things that the Center for Women does is find ways to save individual lives again and again. Just going to read a couple of poems from Native Guard. One of the things that happened to me too in writing Native Guard, I wouldn't have written this book if I had not moved back to Decatur, Georgia. And so in some ways, part of my trajectory is being here at the Center for Women, is being here at Emory, is being in Decatur. This is the place of my own personal tragedy to which I thought I would never return. But this is the way that the past revisits us. And so coming back here, I began to try to deal with what I could not write about all those years, over 25 years ago now. So in the book Native Guard, there are really only 2 poems that address in some subtle way domestic violence. And yet The whole collection itself is undergirded by the idea of a domestic violence, of a civil war, of a war taking place not only in the nation, but inside the home. Women deal with civil wars all the time. Photograph, Ice Storm, 1971. Why the rough edge of beauty? Why the tired face of a woman suffering made luminous by the camera's eye? Or the storm that drives us inside for days, power lines down, food rotting in the refrigerator, while outside the landscape glistens beneath a glaze of ice? Why remember anything but the wonder of those few days, the iced trees, each leaf in its glassy case? The picture we took that first morning, the front yard, a beautiful, strange place. Why on the back has someone made a list of our names, the date, the event, nothing of what's inside? Mother, stepfather's fist. What is evidence? Not the fleeting bruises she'd cover with makeup, a dark patch as if imprint of a scope she pressed her eye too close to, looking for a way out. Nor the quiver in the voice she'd steady, leaning into a pot of bones on the stove. Not the teeth she wore in place of her own, or the official document, its seal and smeared signature fading already, the edges wearing. Not the tiny marker with its dates, her name abstract as history. Only the landscape of her body, splintered clavicle, pierced temporal, her thin bones settling a bit each day, the way all things do. Graveyard Blues. It rained the whole time we were laying her down. Rained from church to grave when we put her down. The suck of mud at our feet was a hollow sound. When the preacher called out, I held up my hand. When he called for a witness, I raised my hand. Death stops the body's work. The soul's a journeyman. The sun came out when I turned to walk away, glared down on me as I turned and walked away, my back to my mother, leaving her where she lay. The road going home was pocked with holes, that home-going road's always full of holes. Though we slow down, time's wheel still rolls. I wander now among names of the dead, my mother's name, stone pillow for my head. It seems to me that this work is also the work of remembering, of reckoning, of making sure we tell the stories again and again in an effort to prevent more stories like this from happening. Monument. Today, the ants are busy beside my front steps, weaving in and out of the hill they're building. I watch them emerge and, like everything I've forgotten, disappear into subterranean, a world made by displacement. In the cemetery last June, I circled, lost, weeds and grass grown up all around, the landscape blurred and waving. At my mother's grave, ants streamed in and out like arteries, a tiny hill rising above her untended plot. Bit by bit, red dirt piled up, spread like a rash on the grass. I watched a long time the ants' determined work, how they brought up soil of which she will be part, and piled it before me. Believe me when I say I've tried not to begrudge them their industry, this reminder of what I haven't done. Even now, the mound is a blister on my heart, a red and humming swarm. I like feeling that I'm in a room in which plenty has been done and is continuing to be done. And it reminds me of all the work that I must do as well. For me, it's a joy to remember my mother and to celebrate with you so that her life means something more than her death. Thank you.